When we say literary translation, it seems obvious that we mean translating literature. But is every translation of a work of literature necessarily literary in itself? And what makes the translated work literary in its own right? I'd like to start with one of my favorite literary works, a famous excerpt from John Donne's Meditation 17. It was written after his recovery from infection during the plague. It reads, "No man is an island, entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. If a clod be washed away by the sea, Europe is the less, as well as if a promontory were, as well as if a manor of thy friends or of thine own were. Any man's death diminishes me, because I am involved in mankind, and therefore never send to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee." Now we could very easily replace this with the simplified version of the text, which would still retain all of the essential meaning. Perhaps something that we might look at like this. No one lives in complete isolation from others, being complete in him or herself. Every person is a part of humanity. The death of any individual, whether a VIP or an ordinary person, and whether I know them or not, takes something away from me, because I'm a part of all humankind. For this reason, every death has an impact on me and you personally. And even this could easily be replaced with a single sentence that still retains the main point or the main meaning of the overall passage. Something like, we are all interconnected, so the death of anyone will necessarily affect me. But what you'll notice is that though the core meaning is retained, there is a decline in impact with each version that we've looked at. Something important is lost in our experience of the text as a reader. What we've lost is not the meaning, but all of the things that were originally involved in building that meaning, and in the process giving it emotional punch. Now, one of the things that was lost was the imagery, the pictures that the passage draws in our minds as we read. In this case, it was images of the landscape, the world around us, and how that world works, and even really of our own place within it. Now, this is a particular feature of John Donne's work, using a conceit or a metaphor that he extends across a long passage. And as he stretches this metaphor out across the entire piece, he builds up an even greater impact as the piece progresses, so that when he reaches that key point, in this case, any man's death diminishes me because I am involved in mankind, then what we have is the emotional weight of the picture all wrapped up in the point that's being made. In this particular piece, we see an additional metaphor tacked on to the end to further emphasize this point, which is the tolling of the church bells. Now remember, this was written during the plague, and John Donne has just recovered from illness when he wrote this, and he feels this connection with the death of everyone who passes on from the plague. And it's a metaphor that is very much of his own time. He hears the bell ringing and he asks himself, is that bell ringing for me? Am I the one who's died this time of the plague? And it's unlike that earlier metaphor, the one of the landscape, which was, not really so time specific. And it could have been written at any time and still have an impact. But in this part, the part about for whom the bell tolls, knowing for whom the bell tolls, that is very specific to John Donne's own situation and his own time. And yet in recent years, it's also begun to resonate with us in our time in a very special way, because we've been living through a similar event for the past 2 years. The onset of our pandemic brings this passage home to us in new ways. We're reminded that we are connected to every death, and we remember those days when the death toll was rising so rapidly. And it's a reminder of also the places that we have missed while we have been in isolation, and in fact of that entire concept of isolation and connection, and how we are remaining connected to all of the people around us. But there's also another very crucial lesson to learn from this for those of us who are translators, and that is that while we can easily retain the meaning of a piece, we can still lose the impact as we move a work from one form to another. If you remember, our passage was diminished, or its impact declined as we stripped away those images, And that's because it's those images that make the work literary. It's those images that bring the punch that should come in a literary work. And this is what is often meant by the phrase lost in translation. As we bring the passage along from one form to another, even within the same language, we can see that by stripping away those powerful images, we end up with a much less powerful piece. If we want to extend the metaphor of our times a bit further, we could say that this last version that we came up with, this single sentence without any of the images involved, is basically like the Omicron variant of the coronavirus. It's very transmissible, but it's not very deadly. When we translate literature, we must ensure that our translation itself gives careful attention to all of the things that went into making the original work literary. It's not enough to create a piece that is transmissible. It must retain all of the potency of the original. We cannot simply strip it down to its barest meaning. Bringing across the meaning alone is not good enough. We must bring across the impact and the power of that original piece. So when we are translating literature, we must remember that the standard of faithfulness in literary translation is much higher than perhaps other forms of translation, and it must always include this question of, have we not only retained the meaning, but also the power of the piece? This is the core mindset that we apply to all of our translation work at Tender Leaves, and it's this mindset that we hope to impart to learners at our online courses. You can visit our website today to find out more. We look forward to seeing you soon.